Hey folks, what's up? Welcome to this video about testing with Cypress. So Cypress is a front-end testing tool, and in this video we are going to focus on writing end-to-end tests with Cypress. Although you should know that you can also write unit and integration tests, which we previously did with React Testing Library with Cypress as well. So for this video, before we are going to install Cypress and some additional libraries, I'd like to ask you to clone this project, which is a very simple app, which we will be testing in this video. I've got it open right here. It's a simple to-do app. So first do that before you start installing Cypress. So if you have cloned the project, then you can proceed installing Cypress and the other libraries, as we have it right here. So I will say npm install as dev dependencies. So first of all, we need Cypress itself. And the next library we will be using is testing library Cypress. And this is optional, but in this video we're going to use it. And what this library allows you to do is to use like the get by role or the get by text selectors like we used in React Testing Library in Cypress, because out of the box Cypress does not allow you to do that. And the next thing is the ESLint plugin for Cypress. So I will install this and I will get back to you once it's done. All right, so the installation is done. So I will close this. And now we need to do some things to get Cypress and the other libraries to work properly. We have to do some setup configurations. And I will start with adding the npm script to the package.json file. It's also right here in the docs, as you can see. So what I will do, I will go to my package.json file. And in here, under scripts, I will add Cypress. And that will have the command of Cypress open. Now you see right here, they say Cypress open, but I will just call it Cypress. But you can do however you like. And now if I go back to my terminal right here, I can say npm run Cypress, and that will cause Cypress to run. And here you see it. This is the first time I'm running it for this project, so it will do some configurations. You'll see right here Cypress will open already. I will close this for now. This is fine for now. So let's continue with the rest. So we need to get IntelliSense working for the Cypress testing library. And we can do so by going into our source folder and create a file called jsconfig.json. And right here we can copy this snippet and paste it. So that's one. Now the next thing is we want to let the Cypress testing library extend the Cypress CUI command. You will find out in a couple of minutes how that's actually working. But we can do that by adding this line to Cypress support commands.js. So I will do that. I will go to Cypress support commands.js and I will add it right here. And for now, I can just remove all this stuff because we don't need it. Okay, so that's done as well. Then we want to add a ESLint.json file to the Cypress directory with the recommended configuration. So we will again go to the Cypress folder and let's take a look. Right here, I think it says, oh yeah, there's the recommended ESLint config file. So let's see, what was it again? .eslint.rc.json. Okay, so it's a dot uselint. Ah, come on. rc dot json. And that's where we copy and paste this. And it will use the recommended settings. Okay. So now we got that set up. There's even a bit more we have to do. Again, you only have to do this, of course, when you initialize Cypress in your project. So the next thing we want to do is create a cypress.json file with a base URL. So I will go to the source folder. We'll say cypress.json. And in here, we want to create a new object. And this is in a JSON format, so we will say base URL. And in our case, because of course we are running our app in localhost, so that's also what we want to use as our base URL. And I can save that. There we go. And the next thing we want to do is remove the default fixtures and integration test. So if you go in the Cypress folder, you will see that we have a file right here in fixtures, and also we have a lot of tests and integration. And we are actually going to write our own test, but this is more, you know, some I guess some examples that Cypress want to show you if you have never worked with it before. But we don't need it, so we can just remove all these files. And also the fixtures example.json file. Oh, there we go. We have the examples folder. We need to remove that one. Okay. And now the next thing we want to do is go to our git ignore file. And right here under the testing section, I will add Cypress/videos. And the reason I do this is that, and screenshots as well. So the reason I do this is that Cypress allows you to record your tests and make also screenshots when they're running. And the problem is that if you do not add it to your git ignore file and you would push this project to GitHub, you will also add the videos and the screenshots. And you can imagine that, you know, throughout time that can become a pretty big chunk of data you're every time have to commit. And also for, you know, other people, when they're downloading your code, they also like pull all these videos, which they probably don't care about. So that's why we put this in git ignore. Okay, so right now we are done with the setup, and we can go to, well, actually writing tests with Cypress. So what you most often see is that you create a file with a certain feature name, a certain feature you want to test, underscore spec.js in the cypress.integration folder. So I'll just close this, and right here we want to well, actually, let's take a look first at the app I built. Let's go through the code a little bit to see what's going on. So right here we have our to-do app, and we can, for example, add a to-do. And once I submit the form, you see there's a little bit of a delay, and that's caused by the set timeout of 500 milliseconds. And then we have the option to check the to-do. We got some styling right here, and we can also remove the to-do. Now, if you noticed that once I edit, the total to-dos count is increased, and once I check it, it is also increases the selected amount of to-dos. So that is kind of like how our app is working currently. Just a quick walk through the code. So we have our onSubmit, and right here we have the to-do that's actually being added. Right here we make a new ID. Now this is a very bad practice if you would do this for like a real life application, because there's just no guarantee that you will have like a unique ID for it to do. But you know, for this demonstration, it's fine. And also note that we do not make any API calls, right? So everything is done in our React application itself to simplify it a little bit. But you can imagine that what we're doing right here is actually our API calls we make. So then we have toggle to do, which is simply the feature where we can toggle the to do itself. And then we have a delete to do function, which will remove the to dos from the to dos array. And then right here, we have a login part. For now, this is disabled because the authenticated state is set to true by default. But at the end of this video, we will change this, and we'll also update our test we are going to write with Cypress for it. And yeah, right here we have the form with a label and the input, right, and the submit button. And then we have our to-dos, which are essentially list items with also there an input and a label. So this is our label, that's our input, and a button to remove it. And here we have the to-do count and the selected to-do count. So before we are going to write the actual tests, I'd like to know that we are going to focus on testing the happy paths, right? So a happy path in, for example, this app would be, like how a user would interact with our app. So they probably will add a couple of to-dos, and then sooner or later they will start, selecting them or removing them. So that's also what we want to do in our end-to-end test. We're going to focus on those happy paths. Right, so depending on what you take as a definition of a unit versus an integration test, those will be more like, smaller tests, more unit tests like. Whereas in the end, we will end up writing one like larger test, which you could consider being to more like of an integration test, right? Like what I would call like a real end-to-end test, where we are actually testing our application, how a user would also interact with our app. So having that said, let's get started writing tests. So I will add a new terminal, and right here I will run our React application right here, and right here I can close this, and here I will say npm run Cypress, and that will open Cypress for us. Takes a bit of time. Okay, so for now we will not need it, because you can also see there are no files found. So let's get started with adding a new file, and we're going to add our test file right here in the integration folder. So I will call this to-dos _ spec.js. So the first thing we want to do is we want to describe what this test is actually doing, and I can show you that when the tests are running. So first of all, we will say describe, and I will just call this to-dos, and we'll put an arrow function in here. So we are going to write a couple of tests. So first, let's plan what we are going to test. And again, this is something I usually would not recommend to do when writing tests, and then we will also refactor this at the end of the video. But I think for us to get a better understanding of how to write tests with Cypress, it's better to make a couple of tests so you get the hang of it. So I want to make a test to check if we can add a to-do. I want to write a test if we can remove a to-do. I want to add a test to check if we can check or toggle, you could say, a to-do. And I want to make a test to check if the to-do count values are correctly updated. Right, so these are the tests we're going to write. I'll just leave it here as a reminder. So the first thing we want to do is visit our application, right? And sometimes you need to go to a specific endpoint, for example, /todos, but of course this is not working in our app because we only have one page. So what I will do right here, I will say before each. So this will run before every test we are going to write that's in this describe block. I will say, oops, before each. There we go. Let's take a look what's going wrong here. Okay, there we go. And then we want to say Cypress dot visit, and we want to visit the root of our application. Okay, so this will ensure that for every test we're going to write below here, it's always going to visit this exact page. So the first test is add to do. So I will say it add to do, and in React Testing Library we use test, but that will not work with Cypress, so we have to call it, right? And you can also use it, by the way, with React Testing Library if you prefer. And then we want to pass in an arrow function right here. And well, let's take a look at how we can test this. So the first thing we want to do is we want to type something right here as our as the title of our to do, and then we want to submit. So let's say do something like this. We submit, and then we want to check if to do 1 is found in our application. So the first thing I will do is, and that's why we installed the Cypress testing library, because now if I go to testing playground and I select our input box, you see we got our get by role, just like we used it in React Testing Library. Now we can also use that in Cypress, and out of the box this would not have been possible with Cypress. So that's pretty neat that we can use that also here. Now you will see it will, because we copied this, and that will give a screen.getByRole. However, that's not going to work with Cypress. So we can skip the screen, and instead of saying get by role, we always want to use find by instead of get by. And well, here we have text box with the name of title, so that's fine. And now let's say we want to type something like to do 1. So now when I save this, we have one test in our todos.spec.js file. And if I open up our Cypress window again, if it closed for you, you can simply go again, say npm run Cypress. Then right here you will see we have now one integration test, and we can run it. You will see that our test will fill, and that is because I made a bit of a mistake in the beginning, because we added the cypress.json file at the source folder. However, we can copy the contents from here, but instead of putting it here, we want to make sure it's in our root folder of our project, right? So not in source, but just right here, just as where package.json lives. And then we want to add that right here. So now when I save it and I go back to running the test, you'll see that our test will load. It takes a bit of time. There we go. And now what you see is that, and I know it's a little hard to see, maybe I'll just increase the screen size a little bit. But what you see right here is that we have our to-do, which is being entered in our input field. And you can see that right here as well. So here we have our to-dos, and that is because we put it right here into the describe block. And then our add to-do function ran, which is being defined right here. And it first visits the the root of our application, right? So this is the before each running. And then we have our actual test body where it finds by role. And you can see right here, once I hover over it, it focuses on the input field and then typed to do, like so. So knowing that this is working, we can submit the form, and we could say we click on submit. But what you could also say is, we have to then chain this, we can say type, and you can also type, I have to do it like this, enter. And this will cause our to-do to be added. So now when I save it, our test automatically will run again, and you will see that our to-do is added right here. So that's great. So if we want to make this test actually work, we have to make an assertion, right? So we want to check if we can find that to-do one. So what I will do, I will go back to my application that's running locally. And now when I select this, you will see we get a suggested query, which is simply get by text. So I will copy this. And now we can say Cypress dot, and then again we have to remove screen and say, instead of get by text, find by text, to do one. And then we want to check if this exists. And in React Testing Library, we use the assertion to be in the document, but right here we will say should exist. Right, this is how Cypress is working. And this is our actual assertion, right? So now when I save this and I go back to our tests, you will see that cannot call Cypress find by text outside of a function, and I put it on the wrong line. So let's put that right here, and now you'll see our test will run. And here we have the assertion, and it exists in the DOM. So if we would change this to, for example, 2, which of course does not exist, you will see our, at least Cypress is trying to find to do 2, and there's a timer of, I think, 4 to 5 seconds. But you see now, oh, there we go, 4 seconds. And you see right now it says timed out, retrying after 4 seconds, unable to find an element with the text to do 2. So that was pretty simple. That was our first test in Cypress. I'll change this back to 1, so our test will run successfully again. And yeah, this is pretty nice. So let's go on and add a test for removing a to-do. So I will say right here, remove to-do. So the first thing we want to do is essentially do the same thing as we did right here, right? So we want to add a to-do. So I'll just copy and paste it for now. And then we want to click on the remove button of that to-do. So I can go back to my testing playground. And now when I select our button, you will see it says get by role, button name remove. Now this will cause a problem. Maybe you'll already know what could go wrong right here. But let's just execute this code first. So I will say find by role, button remove. And then we want to click this button, right? So we say click. Pretty simple. And now we want to make the assertion that, and I can simply copy and paste this, because now we want to check if to do 1 does not exist anymore on the page. So I will say right here, not dot exist. And now when I save it, you will see both tests will run and both will succeed. Now, if we really want to focus on one test, because of course, if you will add a lot of tests, you might have to wait quite a bit of time before the test you're actually concerned about runs. We could say it dot only, and now it will only run the remove test. And you will see that if we hover over this, it will add the to do, and then it clicks the remove button, and then the to-dos or the to-do is gone. So that's fine. But now imagine that we add two to-dos, right? So I will say to do 2. But now let's imagine that we want to check if to do 2 doesn't exist anymore. So we want to remove to do 2. Now when I save the test, you will see it will still succeed. And the problem is that if we go through what's going on here, it will add that first to do, then it will add the second to do. And then because we have a timeout of 500 milliseconds before the to-dos actually show up, it finds that remove button, it will click on it, and then it will, finalize the test. It will make the assertion, and it will say to-do 2 was not found in the DOM because, it didn't have the time to actually get there anyway, because we had the timeout of 500 milliseconds. So let's actually wait for both to actually show up in the DOM. So I can say Cypress dot wait, let's say for 2 seconds. That's more than enough. So now you see we have to wait. Now both to-dos will show. And now you will see we will get an error because it will say found multiple elements with the row button and name remove, right? So we have 2 buttons, and Cypress didn't know which one to pick. So in order to prevent that from happening, we can do 2 things. So Cypress itself also has like a selector playground, just as we used it with the testing playground Chrome extension for React testing library. We can actually let Cypress decide what button to click. So let's say we want to have the second button, right? So of to do 2, then I can go right here, click, and you will see that it selects the second child of the unordered list and then the button. So I can copy this, for example, and now instead of this I could do something like this, and now if the test will run again, you will see it will actually click the second button right here. Now this is possible, but I think this is not a very good practice, generally speaking, when writing your test. Like as soon as you're going to like nest and kind of like chain HTML elements, it gets a little tricky, especially if you extend your test and you will add some extra X. Let's imagine we would add another test and remove one. Maybe then the second child is not to do 2 anymore, but is to do 3, right? So you always should be careful with this. So in this case, I'd prefer to use a test ID because there's not a good way to select this button by its role or its text, because it's simply it says remove. So we can, of course, we could say remove to do 2, but let's imagine that the design that was given to us does not allow for that. So in that case, what I will do, I will go back to the app component, and now right here to the list item, I will add a test ID. And for Cypress, it's conventional to call this data dash CY, and I will call this let's see, to do with the to do name, which or the to do title actually, which we destructured right here. And now when I save this and I go back to my app and I refresh it and I will add another to do, you will see that once I go to elements and I click right here on our to do, you will see that it has the list item now has this new data dash CY attribute with the to do and its title. So now if we head back over to Cypress, and I'll just make sure it refreshes our application. Now I can open the selector, and now if I click right here, you will see Cypress will also prefer that test ID, right? And then it will target the button, but we can do it a little differently because we can use the get by role because we actually want to target the button. So I will do this, and instead of selecting the button like this, I will actually say right here, dot within, and that takes an arrow function. So that means right inside of that, right inside of that element we are targeting right here, we want to get the role, and that's how we did it before with the testing library playground extension. So I can use this. And of course we have to say Cypress, and we can change this to find by role. And then we want to simulate the click. And you might argue that obviously compared to the previous line, this is a little bit more code, but I think this better resembles the way how a user would use our application, because they would first look for that to do and then click its remove button. And that's kind of like what we're doing right here. And yeah, we just have to use the test ID because this is the label, and we cannot say, for example, get by text and then click the button, right? That wouldn't work because it's you know, we need to target the whole list element. So that's why we added that test ID. Of course, in order to make this work, because we want to remove the second to do, we have to change the title as well. So imagine that, of course, if we would have changed it to do 3, we also have to check for to do 3 right here. But now you will see when I will save our test will still work. And I think this is a much better practice of testing our code. All right, so now we've created 2 tests with Cypress. But like I said before in the beginning, is that this is not the way how I would personally prefer to write my end-to-end test, because we're testing, you know, very small pieces of, you know, our application now, right? These are very like little features we're testing, adding a to-do, removing a to-do, and we could go on and also write a test to check if the toggle is working and if the total to-do count is working and if the selected to-do count is working. But what I'm much more interested in is if this application works properly as a whole. So what I will do, I will actually remove this, and we will write one test, and that will, you know, do a couple of things. It will do a couple of acts. It will make a couple of assertions. But in my opinion, that will be a much better test and give us much more confidence that our app is working the way we want it to. So right here, I will say it, let's say user can add, check, and delete to-dos. And we have our arrow function right there. So the first thing I want to do is I want the user to, let's say, add 2 to-dos, right? So let's start all the way from scratch again. So I go to my testing playground. Because it's so easy, we can just copy and paste everything. And right here, we'll say find by role, text box, and then we will say that type to do 1, and it will also press enter. So that will cause us to have 1 to do, but we want to create 2 of them. So let's actually do that. And then we want to make the assertion if both to-dos are showing up, right? So I will say, I go back to my React app right here, This is simply get by text. So I will say Cypress find by text, and of course I have to change this to do one, and we want to know if this exists, and we want to make another exertion and check if the second to do, I have to change this as well, also exists. So let's run this function, take a look, boom, there we go. The test is running perfectly fine. Now we can also make another assertion right here, because we can also check now if the total to do count is 2. So I can actually say total to dos should be 2, right? And I think it's always a good thing to also let your task fill a couple of times to check if you did didn't make any mistakes in your test. But now you will see Cypress is trying to find that piece of text of total to dos 3, but it's not able to find it. And now if we change it to 2, it should work. And there we go. So the next thing we want to do is check a to-do. Let's say we want to check to-do 2. So we will have another act right here. And we will say, let's take a look. I will just use the testing playground again. Let's say we want to check this checkbox right here. So we can say Cypress. And you might find this is a little bit, of, repeating work, clicking things and entering things, submitting forms. But that's, in the end, that's what a big part of testing is. So that's why I want you to do it again, see it again. So it really, gets stuck in your mind for as long as you need it. So now we have Cypress find by role, checkbox with the name of, and of course, in this case, we want to have to do 2. And then right here, we can say, we could click the checkbox, of course, but we can also say check, which is also a function in Cypress. So let's run that, see if it's working. Boom, you see Cypress did check the checkbox. And then we can make another assertion, because now we want to check if the selected to-do count is 1. So I'll just copy and paste this. Total should be selected. And this should be 1. So now let's save it. And the test should pass. There we go. And now let's imagine that we also want to click the remove button like we did before. So right there we have to, I'll take the Cypress selector again, copy it. So instead of doing this, we will do, gotta be this, dot within. And then in there we want to search for a button with the, of course, the row of button in the type or the name of remove. So I will just copy this and change it to button and remove. And then we want to simulate the click right here, like this. So let's take a look if that's working. Yep, there we go. And now we can, for example, make another assertion to check if the total to-do count is 1. So I can do something like this. Find by text, total to-dos 1 should exist. There we go. And now you see we have a bit of a larger test, right? Because we do a couple of a couple of acts and a couple of assertions. But I like this much more. And also notice that this test only took like 1 second, just over 1 second to run. And if you've noticed before, the previous tests, which was the what was it again? Add and delete functionality. I think those tests together took about 2.5, 3 seconds. Imagine if we had to write tests for check and delete as well. Probably those 4 tests would have taken 4 to 5 seconds. So we've also drastically decreased the time our test took. And you can imagine that now you're thinking like, well, what does it care? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. But you can imagine we only tested one feature of an application, right? If you have a large application, the test can sometimes run for like minutes. And, there's even people that, have not really optimized their test, but they have, test suites that run for hours, right? Some even 4, 5, 6 hours. Obviously, if that's the case, there's probably something wrong with the way you're testing, but that's another story. But I like this much more, right? This is much more like a typical user flow, and this gives me a lot of confidence to ship to my client. And then, whenever someone is going to work on the code, and we run the test, we will easily see if features are broken or not. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is our Cypress commands. And Cypress commands are great if you have a piece of logic you need to repeat often. So what I said before is that we have this authentication state in our application. And now if I set it to false and save it, you will see our app behaves a little differently because first we have to click on the login button and then our app is showing. But you will find that if I now go to our Cypress test runner and I will rerun the tests, our test will fail, of course, because it's not able to find all the elements, and that's why it's failing. And of course, what I could do right here, I could, right here in Cypress, I could say, let's again take our testing playground. So we want to click this button, which is a get by role. And then right here, we could say Cypress dot find by role. And then we simulate the click. And this will, of course, run before every test we write, so including this one. And now when I save it, you will see our test will run and will succeed. But you can imagine that if right now we have a very small app, but if you have a larger app with, a lot of features, you probably will have multiple integration test files. And in those cases, it might be nice to have more like a function that just does the login for you without you having to do that before each and every time handle that login. And we can use Cypress commands for that. And we will put that in Cypress/support/commands. So I will go right here to support, commands. This is also where we imported the commands from the Cypress testing library. And we're actually going to write this. So we can say cypress.commands.add, and we'll call it login. That's also how we will call this function in our tests. And then I will actually copy this like so. Perfect. And now I'm going to go back to Cypress and save the task file. Of course, it would fail because now it does not even visit our application. But now we can simply say cypress.login and we can execute that function. And this is great because we can now use this in all the other tests we might need to create. And now when I save it, you will see it will still work. So that's a great feature that comes with Cypress commands. Another thing I'd like to talk about is targeting by role versus test ID. Now, if you look in the documentation of React Testing Library, you will see that it will recommend you to use selectors like get by role or find by role, of course, find by text. And if you look all the way down the list, right, there's a certain priority in the selectors you should choose. And all the way down on the list is the test ID. But Cypress says it's better to use test IDs in order to prevent having your tests breaking when the content changes, or when you make some JavaScript changes, or change, for example, your CSS class names. So they recommend those test IDs. Now, the counter argument, which mainly comes from the React testing library community, is that they say, well, if let's say the content changes, because most of the time we are querying by text or names, right? If that is changing, then most likely you want to have your tests filled, because let's say you have a login form and the username label changes in email address, then most likely you as a developer would like to get notified of that, because you have to change your implementation as well, right? Because that will have consequences for your application, and you want to know about them. So you can say either pick a side, but I think like what we did right here, right, like using the test ID for this scenario was perfectly fine. But in general, I always prefer to query for things like get by role or get by text. Why? Simply because it is much more comparable to how the user interacts with your app. Because if a user is using your application, they're actually looking to the content, right? They're looking to the button with the name. They're looking to the checkbox with the label attached to it. They're not looking at the test IDs. So whenever you can, try to use the query selectors with get by role being your top priority, or otherwise try to grab something by its text. And if that's not possible, there are just use cases where you need to use a test ID, and in that case, just use it because you have to. Having that said, the main takeaways of wrapping up the whole testing section of this course is that you have to make sure that your tests are similar to how users interact with your application, right? Do not test implementation details, but try to test your app in a way how it's also used in reality, so it gives you confidence that things are working for your users. The other point I'd like to make is to keep things simple. Okay, it's very easy to get lost in testing and start testing like a lot of strange and odd things. And always keep in mind that testing it's not that difficult, but you have to make the right decisions. And I think you can, if you're writing tests, always keep in mind, what if someone else would check this test? Would they understand what I did right there, right? So I think that's a good way to keep yourself in check with writing simple and understandable tests. So the last thing I'd like to let you know is that I have a full React course where we are going to build a real world application with like all the things we've learned in this course and really put everything together. If you want to know more about it, you can find more in the description, but I will also tell you more about it in the course outro, the last video of this course, which will be called Course Outro, Where to Go From Here. And there will also tell you a little bit more about that course. But of course, right now we were just able to, scratch the surface of testing, including writing end-to-end tests. But in that course, we're going to write real end-to-end tests for a real-life application. So you really get the hang of, how to write it and how to implement it yourself. So having that said, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.